I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Genesis Does returns with Fantasy Zone The Maze, a 1 mega cartridge. Now, in a previous episode, I talked about the fact that I would like to cover the first Fantasy Zone game, but I can't because it came out for the Famicom and it came out in the United States as a Tengen cartridge. And when I did a little research into Fantasy Zone 2, I had the exact same problem. It was also released for Famicom. So the only Fantasy Zone game that you can truly say is a Sega exclusive is Fantasy Zone The Maze, which was called Opa-Opa in Japan. And it is the third in the Fantasy Zone trilogy of games for Sega Master System. And Genesis does Sega Master System, whether you're on a power-based converter or using the analog Mega SG with the included adapter. Anyway, you can see this is a complete copy in nice condition. So without further ado, let's pop it into said analog Mega SG and get to playing. Now, one of the problems with doing research about this game for this video is that you end up going in a recursive loop when you try to look it up on Wikipedia. If you search for Fantasy Zone The Maze, it comes up as a sequel to Fantasy Zone. And if you click on the link for the sequel, it takes you right back around to the Fantasy Zone page, so you get nowhere fast. But thankfully, SegaRetro.org does have a full entry for Fantasy Zone The Maze, so I would like to quote from it just for a moment while you watch some of my gameplay footage. Ahem. Fantasy Zone The Maze, known in Japan as Opa-Opa, is an entry in the Fantasy Zone series. It was released for Sega Master System in 1987, with an arcade version following shortly after. It is often referred to as Fantasy Zone 3, although this is not an official title. Unlike previous entries, Fantasy Zone is similar to Pac-Man. The hero, Opa-Opa, must navigate around a series of mazes, collecting coins while avoiding enemies. These coins can be used to buy weapons, giving Opa-Opa a defense, or allowing him to travel faster. The levels are based on those found around the original Fantasy Zone, though there are also bonus levels in which Opa-Opa must collect as many coins as possible before time runs out. And as you can see, once you collect all the coins in a maze, your enemies turn into coins. And you are also rewarded with bonus coins based on how fast you can complete a maze. You will also notice that the shop music from the original Fantasy Zone carries over, which I did note in my video about Super Hang-On, seems to have been the definitive shop music for Sega games, which is why I wanted to do a Fantasy Zone video game in the first place, was because of Super Hang-On. So if you've already watched that video, thanks for watching, and if not, go to the Genesis Does playlist after this is over, of course, and you can check it out there. Now, one of the gimmicks of these mazes is that the enemies get additional power-ups and additional enemies they can shoot at you if you don't touch the red spot on the screen periodically, which makes you have to make some very difficult choices. Do you ignore it and go for weapons and power-ups? Do you try to clear the maze and hope that you can get it ahead of all the enemies appearing? Or do you just keep continually touching it and record a slower time to complete the maze and lose some of your potential bonuses as a result? There ends up being a lot of strategy to Fantasy Zone The Maze. You're constantly choosing the balance between clear time, getting the most coins, which power-ups you want, and how often you want to touch that red spot. Now let's go back to the wonderful SegaRetro.org for a minute and get some more information about the game. The release dates. Let me see where they've got it listed. Japan, 1987, July 20th. And then in the US, 1988, July, no specific date. In the United Kingdom, 1988 in May, no specific date. Most of the rest of these are 1988 May or 1988, so pretty much the same in all different regions. It does support the FM sound unit if you have it, and if you don't, you'll hear the regular Sega Master System music. And if you don't know what the FM sound unit is, well, I'm glad you asked, because I'll be happy to tell you Sega Retro also has an intro about that. It is an add-on for the Sega Master System used to enhance the sound output of certain games. It was sold in Japan from 1987 on for 6,800 yen. It contains an FM chip that acts on top of the built-in PSG chip, adding 9 extra mono sound channels. When the redesigned Sega Master System hit the Japanese market, the FM sound unit was built in, though it is absent from international releases. Yeah, we got hosed, Davey. We got hosed. Now, I believe that the Analog Mega SG supports the FM sound unit as an option, but I did not check the settings before I put this game in, nor, to be honest, have I bothered to check in previous Sega Master System games that I played for Genesis does. That's a bit of an oversight on my part, and I apologize for that. So, in the future, I'm going to make sure that if FM sound unit is an option for Sega Master System games, that I'll turn it on first so you get to hear the enhanced soundtrack. There are quite a few games that support it, and some pretty big name games too. I would say if you were playing any of these games, you would be disappointed not to hear it. Phantasy Star, Afterburner, Alex Kidd, The Lost Stars, Double Dragon, Fantasy Zone 2, Shinobi, Outrun, Wise the Vanished Omen, Wonder Boy in Monsterland, Space Harrier 3D. The list goes on and on. There are also games with FM soundtracks that were not released in Japan, which is curious considering international versions did not have the FM sound support, and that includes Altered Beast, Outrun 3D, Rampage, Time Soldiers, Ultima 4, Vigilante, and so on. Let me read again from the Sega Retro page explaining this. Out of these, only Wonder Boy 3 is known to have been released in South Korea. However, the FM audio in Wonder Boy 3 will only function with a Japanese system. Western consoles modified with FM audio use PSG due to the game's region detection code. Now that one I know you can get around with the Analog Mega SG because it lets you set the region of your system in the settings. So if it's trying to default to North America, you can force it to default to Japan by just changing your region in the settings. That's just one of those quirks with Sega Master System games. It's fun because PAL games work almost flawlessly in a US Sega Master System. Japanese games always work, but you may not get the full enriched sound that you would unless you have a modified Sega Master System or you're using an emulator. Otherwise, you're just getting gypped. And aren't you glad that in the 30 years since games like this came out, that they finally realized that region locking features is not the way to go. Region locking games is kind of an antiquated concept now, because you can buy PS4 games from any region of the world and play them on your console. You can buy Nintendo Switch games from any region of the world and pop them in your slot and you're good to go. You can even set the region of your account on your Switch to Japan and buy games from the Japanese eShop, which I've done because when I signed up for the Switch Online service, I made sure to download both the NES and the Famicom version of the Switch games that are supported for Switch Online. You know, all the different NES re-releases that they've done. Now, it would be interesting but unlikely to ever happen that someday they would expand Switch Online beyond just NES games. I know everybody's pining for Super Nintendo games, and so am I, but wouldn't it be nice if they actually supported, just like the old Virtual Console, if they had Sega Master System games, TurboGrafx games, arcade games? Just think of the amount of things they could add to it if they weren't so dead set stuck on, we're going to just filter tiny amounts of our NES library out, drip, 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 a few at a time. And some of the games, let's be honest, nobody is exactly clamoring for. Of course, everybody wants to play Metroid, Super Mario Bros. 3, The Legend of Zelda, Double Dragon, but then once you start getting down into the drip feed of games they put out, how many people were clamoring to play City Connection? I don't think so. Baseball? Definitely not. Volleyball? Absolutely not. Wrecking Crew is good if you're enthusiastic about obscure games that do have Mario as a featured character, but it's not a terribly fun game. It's more of a curiosity as far as I'm concerned. Tecmo Bowl, that's really only fun if you're playing it with friends. If you're playing it against the computer, it's not so great. And I don't even know with stuff like Vice Project Doom. I probably need to give that a more thorough play, but that wasn't one that struck me as a stellar title back when I first bought it for my NES collection, and I haven't gone back to it since. And the fact that it's in Switch Online didn't light my world on fire. Now, watch somebody in the comments say, Vice Project Doom is a great game. Mr. MegaManFan, you've been sleeping on it. Well, if that's the case, wake me up, but don't let me go. Just tell me that I'm needing to play it on the low. So anyway, back to Fantasy Zone the Maze. As you can see, I am constantly getting stuck in this battle where I'm getting overwhelmed by enemies because these mazes don't always allow you to get to that spot before more enemies are generated. But one of the nice things you can do is select the different area that you want to play, such as Dalamica, or Dalmatia is what I want to say every time I see the name. And you can go to those different worlds and play different mazes. You don't have to play from the start to the end sequentially. It's not exactly like Mega Man in that you get any sort of reward for doing it out of order. You don't get power-ups that you can use to defeat the other enemies. Although maybe if you bank enough coins, it would help you. Like if you pick a level that's coin heavy, and then you use that to get items from these little bubbles that represent the shops, maybe there's an advantage there. There might be a tactical order to play Fantasy Zone the Maze in that works the best, but quite honestly, the best thing you can do is buy this fireball power-up that just lets you steamroll over all of your enemies. You know, saying that, it actually reminds me that Fantasy Zone the Maze, although it got compared to Pac-Man on the Sega Retro website, I actually think it's more like Crush Roller, aka Make Tracks, because the way it's squared off and the lines that you have to follow and the paths that the enemies are limited to, it's Pac-Man, but it doesn't have that chase feel of Pac-Man. It doesn't even feel like these monsters are necessarily specifically going for you. They're just wandering around these very specific blocky paths that they're limited to. And if they just happen to cross your path, then you're screwed. But other than that, it's not like they're actively hunting you down like Inky and Blinky and Pinky and Clyde. So I wouldn't call it a Pac-Man game. Maybe I'd call it Pac-Man-esque. Does anybody remember a game called Jawbreaker 2 on the Commodore 64? That one also got compared to Pac-Man, and I thought it was wildly inaccurate. And not just because I actually had an authorized Pac-Man game that came out on a 5 1/4 inch floppy disk. Anybody besides me remember those things? Well, it was not in any way, shape, or form a Pac-Man game when I played it, and I was actually delighted by that. I thought Jawbreaker 2 was a lot of fun. It had things you could chomp on, and it had monsters, but it was in no way a maze. It was like a stacked up series of levels that you went up and down to each level trying to clear. I'm probably not doing it justice to explain it that way, but this is not Commodore does, this is Genesis does. Maybe I'll try playing that in emulation for a video, a spin-off series at some point, but suffice it to say, a lot of things that get compared to Pac-Man just really aren't Pac-Man in any way, shape, or form. I mean, even this fails the litmus test because, first of all, these coins that you're picking up are not all uniformly worth the same amount. The bigger they are, the more points they're worth, and there's no option for that in Pac-Man. And the coins also decrease in value over time if you wait too long to collect them, and there's no such thing in Pac-Man either. And you're definitely not buying items to attack your enemies with in Pac-Man. The only way you can attack them is by eating the Energizer and swallowing them while they're afraid of you. But unfortunately for me, there's no such fear in these enemies, and for some reason it's not letting me buy the Fireball ship, so I think this run of Fantasy Zone the Maze has come to an end. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Thank you for watching Genesis Does. Subscribe if you're not already a subscriber, and I'll see you next Thursday. Bye for now.